You are not tired because you have a busy life. You are tired because your brain keeps running the same invisible trial over and over, and you are burning your limited mental energy on a sentence you will never be able to appeal. And here is the part nobody wants to admit out loud. In 2026, you are not losing to your job, your rent, or inflation first. You are losing to your own mind, quietly, daily, like a slow leak you learn to ignore. This is not financial advice. This is financial education about the mental machinery behind money decisions, risk, and the choices that make people fall behind or recover when life gets expensive. Think about the average modern day. You wake up, check your phone, and the world starts negotiating with your nervous system. You see layoffs, AI progress, mortgage rates, a headline about the Fed, another about housing insurance costs, another about a market hitting highs again. Your brain treats all of it like danger, not because you are weak, but because you are trained to anticipate consequences. You feel it in your body first: tight chest, restless sleep, the sensation that you are behind even when you are moving. Then it becomes thoughts, and thoughts become effort, and effort becomes depletion. That invisible depletion is what people used to call anxiety, or overthinking, or stress. But there is a more accurate term for the specific pattern: mental waste, burning attention and decision power on scenarios that cannot be solved by thinking. In 2026, mental waste is not just an emotional problem, it is a financial problem. When your brain is overloaded, you stop making good decisions. You make faster, smaller, more desperate decisions. You stop planning, you stop researching, you stop resisting the pull of quick fixes, and you become easier to steer. Most people never connect those dots. They blame their failures on discipline, on motivation, on luck. But the mechanism is simpler and darker. Your mental capacity is finite. Psychology studies and practical self-regulation research consistently show that when you spend too much effort on rumination and conflict inside your head, your ability to focus, prioritize, and act declines. You do not have limitless willpower. You have a budget, and you are overspending it on worries. Let's start with a story you have probably lived. Before a deadline, you begin rehearsing the worst outcome. You imagine the meeting where someone judges you. You imagine the email thread you cannot control. You imagine how you will explain yourself, and you imagine how you will fail at explaining yourself. So you think more, then you think again. Then you double-check, rewrite, reevaluate. You lose sleep. You feel like you are preparing, but what you are really doing is paying interest on fear. Now imagine that fear keeps you trapped for days, not hours. This is how mental waste becomes chronic. You start to delay action because you are stuck negotiating with your own doubt. You become the person who is always almost ready, always close, always one more thought away from feeling safe. But you never reach safe, not because safety is impossible, because you are building safety out of thinking. Thinking cannot settle uncertainty permanently. Action can. And that is the first uncomfortable truth. Action is not just a way to solve problems. Action is the off switch for rumination. When you take the next physical step, even a small one, your brain stops running the loop. You interrupt the autopilot. Here is a pattern interrupt for you. The next time you catch yourself spiraling, ask a cruel question: am I solving anything right now, or am I just paying for relief that never arrives? They tell you to calm down. They tell you to breathe. Sometimes that helps. But in the real world, especially in 2026, you need something sharper than calm. You need an instruction that changes behavior. You need a rule that forces forward motion. In the version of life you were promised, your worries would lead to planning. In the version you are actually living, your worries lead to avoidance. Avoidance leads to missed deadlines. Missed deadlines lead to more stress. More stress leads to more avoidance. The loop tightens like a knot. Now bring this into money. Money is just a system of future promises. Bills are future promises. Paychecks are future promises. Retirement is a future promise. Housing is a future promise. Even passive income is just a story about future cash flows. So if your mind is stuck in a loop, you will struggle with anything that requires future thinking. You will either overthink your future until you freeze, or you will escape into the present until your future collapses. In 2026, the future is unusually hostile. AI disruption is not theoretical anymore. It is not sometime later. It is in the job boards, in the hiring freezes, in the automation of tasks that used to be entry points for the middle class. People are discovering that the advice from 2020 sounds like a joke now. Learn to code, they said. Build a portfolio, they said. But AI can draft code, refactor it, and test it faster than most humans can explain what they want. And companies, especially large ones, are using tools to reduce headcount while increasing output. While you are trying to adapt, your mind is trying to predict. Predicting creates mental waste. Mental waste steals time from learning, from networking, from building real leverage. And when your time gets stolen, your options shrink. That is not destiny. That is a pipeline. Federal Reserve decisions add another layer. When the Fed raises rates, your monthly reality changes. Loans get more expensive. Credit card interest becomes a tax you cannot avoid. If you have a mortgage, you feel it through refinancing plans you suddenly cannot afford. If you are renting, you feel it because landlords try to maintain cash flow and because economic uncertainty makes moves harder. People hear rates stabilize and they relax, but your purchasing power does not magically recover. Real wages catch up slowly, if they catch up at all. Inflation may cool on paper, but the cost structure in your life changes. Groceries, insurance, rent, utilities, healthcare expenses, they rarely bounce back quickly. And here is where mental waste becomes financial self-sabotage. When you are mentally depleted, you stop tracking your actual numbers. You stop comparing prices with discipline. You stop renegotiating subscriptions. You stop calling insurers. You stop reading the fine print. You keep buying because buying feels like control, even when it is actually loss. Another pattern interrupt. You are not bad with money. You are bad with mental bandwidth. Your brain is running simulations all day, and the simulation is not free. Now let's widen the lens to housing, because housing is the most brutal teacher. Across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, housing has detached from wages. The numbers have shifted from hard to horrifying. People who worked for years discover that home ownership is not a reward for effort anymore. It is a lottery with interest rate arithmetic. Meanwhile, rental prices rise and move faster than your income. Many families realize that they may rent for a lifetime, not because they refuse to buy, but because the cost of entry remains unreachable. So what happens in your mind? You spiral. You blame yourself. You scroll mortgage calculators at midnight. You search for ways to buy a home sooner. You imagine a miracle. Then you imagine failure. Then you start again. But the loop never ends because no amount of thinking changes the math of supply, interest rates, and wage growth. This is why mental waste is a trap. It gives you the feeling of progress without producing progress. It fills time while you miss windows of action that matter. In 2026, even content is part of the trap. Social media sells you the fantasy that you can escape work through passive income. It sells you the idea that you can build a side empire while you keep your day job. But the reality is harsher. The creator economy has a brutal distribution curve. Most creators earn little or nothing. Most viral stories have unseen sponsorship budgets behind them. Many people you see winning are subsidized by an audience or a prior career track. The dream is not impossible, but it is not what it looks like when you are watching the highlight reel. If your mind is already depleted, you become vulnerable to these promises, because you are desperate for a solution that requires less energy. But the cost of chasing an illusion is still time, still attention, still hope. And hope without action becomes another form of mental waste. Now we get to the second level of dark understanding. People talk about mental waste as if it is personal weakness. That is not true. It is also an economic risk. Your mental depletion makes you more likely to be exploited by systems that profit from confusion. Financial marketing is not designed to reduce your stress. It is designed to capture your attention, and attention is the commodity that keeps the machine running. In 2026, the attention economy is fused with algorithms that know when you are anxious and then feed you more anxiety-flavored content. You watch a video about market crashes and you feel fear. Then you see another about hidden opportunities. Then you see another about a new token, a new platform, a new claim that banks are obsolete. It feels like freedom, but you are being moved like a piece on a board. Crypto promised decentralization. In 2026, regulation has tightened and institutional players have expanded their reach. More crypto is held by institutions and platforms than retail people realize. Meanwhile, the technical friction, the custody risk, the platform risk, the tax complexity, all create stress. And stress becomes mental waste. Mental waste shows up as overtrading. It shows up as chasing returns you cannot emotionally survive. It shows up as holding assets you do not understand, because refusing to learn feels safer than learning slowly. Again, action interrupts the loop, but mental waste makes action feel threatening. So you delay. And delay is how people get pushed into bad positions. Now let's return to psychology and one old truth that keeps getting ignored. Humans do not just worry because life is uncertain. We worry because our minds are designed to simulate. Our brain runs scenarios to prepare for danger. That design becomes useful when the simulation turns into action. It becomes harmful when the simulation never stops and never ships into reality. There is a reason the old philosophers compared humans to a reed that thinks. The mind can sway in the wind. The wind is fear. The reed is you. The famous line is from Pascal, but the modern version is simpler. Your thoughts are wind, and you keep dancing with it. So here is a cliffhanger into the most practical part. Remember the nurse from earlier that you will meet again, not literally but conceptually, because this story repeats in different job titles and different cities. Picture a 32-year-old nurse named David. He works nights. He did overtime when the paycheck was tight. He tried to keep a budget, but he stopped because every time he looked at his bank app, he felt nauseous. He worried about whether a correction would come, whether his retirement would shrink, whether his health insurance costs would jump, whether his landlord would raise rent. He started doomscrolling. He started telling himself that he needed more information before making any moves. Then one night, he fell asleep with his phone open. He woke up late and missed a shift pickup. That mistake cost him hours, and the lost hours made the budget problem real again. That reality created more fear, and the fear created more mental waste. He thought he was researching. He was actually delaying recovery. Now you can see the mechanism. Rumination steals the energy required for corrective action, and corrective action is what changes financial outcomes. So what do you do, practically, when the problem is not just money, but your internal cost structure? You do something the mental waste crowd never does. You narrow what you can control. You widen what you can influence. Stephen Covey's idea of circles is useful here because it translates directly into financial behavior. There is the circle of concern, where you think about everything that might go wrong: the Fed, the economy, AI layoffs, housing supply, climate insurance, your employer, market crashes, the next emergency, the next recession, the next news cycle. This circle expands to fill your mind like mold. Then there is the circle of influence. This is the portion of life where your effort changes outcomes, your budget decisions, your skills, your job search actions. Your negotiation calls, your emergency fund policy, your spending boundaries, your credit strategy, your health habits that affect your earning capacity. Mental waste usually comes from focusing on concern like it is influence. You stare at the things you cannot move until you feel busy. Then you go to sleep defeated. But the smarter move, the one that reduces mental depletion, is to shrink the concern circle and expand the influence circle by turning vague fear into specific action. And here is where we connect this to the 2026 world again. When AI threatens your job, mental waste makes you wait for clarity. You wait for a sign from the market. You wait for a hiring manager to respond. You wait for an online course to feel finished. Meanwhile, AI systems keep improving. Your competitors adapt. Your window closes. What you do instead is ugly and effective. You choose one influence action per week, and you do it on a calendar, not in your head. If you work in an office job, you pick one workflow and you learn how to automate part of it. Not learn AI. Learn one tool that reduces your repetitive tasks. Then you document the outcome. Then you show it to your manager if it is appropriate. Action creates credibility, and credibility reduces panic. If you work in healthcare, you focus on your schedule stability and your licensing knowledge. You prepare for staffing changes by building relationships and learning how to qualify for roles that are less automatable. That is influence. If you are in education or training, you stop thinking about whether your field is disappearing and start thinking about what parts still require human judgment and empathy. Those parts exist, and they pay when you are trained for them. You do not solve macro forces. You build personal leverage. Now, the next cliffhanger is critical, because most people miss it. Even when you take action, mental waste can survive if you do not stop feeding it with unresolved emotional conflict. You can follow a budget template perfectly and still collapse emotionally. Why? Because your mind is carrying an internal argument. The part of you that believes you are not safe versus the part of you that knows you need to act. That internal conflict becomes friction. Friction becomes procrastination. Procrastination becomes missed opportunities. There is a reason self-help books focus so much on emotional regulation. It is not fluff, it is a performance system. Now bring this into your finances. If you are constantly anxious, you will overreact to money events. A small overdraft feels like doom. A minor dip in savings feels like collapse. You start to believe your life is unstable. That belief creates impulsive decisions, expensive purchases, high-interest debt, desperation investments, emotional withdrawals from retirement planning, or quitting a career move prematurely because you cannot emotionally handle the transition. So the goal is not just calm. The goal is to reduce the number of internal battles you fight. One Japanese psychologist, in different popular summaries of her work, argues that the habit of worrying about the future is often useless because the future cannot be predicted. That idea sounds simplistic until you watch what people do with it. You can see someone plan for every possibility and still remain helpless because they never stop the simulation loop. They stay trapped in the what-if machine. Now I am going to make this more uncomfortable. Because in 2026, the what-if machine is profitable for someone else. When you are anxious, you click. When you click, platforms earn money. When you are desperate, you buy products, subscriptions, and courses. When you are fearful, you trade more aggressively, and some other party takes the other side of your trade. So the system you live inside rewards your mental waste. That is why the behavior advice from older self-help traditions still matters. It is not about becoming a nicer person. It is about preserving the energy required to protect your financial outcomes. So let's talk about tools that reduce mental waste without requiring magical thinking. First, you create a decision ritual, not a journal of emotions, not a long meditation session you never finish. A ritual that forces action. For example, when you catch rumination, you ask one question only: what is the next smallest action that moves this issue forward in under 15 minutes? Then you do it immediately. You pay one bill, you schedule one call, you reply to one email, you delete one app that feeds doom, you write a single paragraph of job application content. You do not solve everything, you move the block. Second, you reduce triggers that feed the loop. If social media makes you anxious, you cut it. Not gradually, you cut it like a fire hose. You decide on 1 hour per day for scrolling, and the rest of the time, you remove the feed. In 2026, this is not just self-care, it is attention protection. Attention is your money-making capital. Third, you use movement as a reset. In research summaries, people show improved mood after regular exercise. You do not need a perfect routine. You need a reliable reset that interrupts rumination. A 10-minute walk, a jog, strength training. Anything that moves your body tells your brain that danger is not happening right now. It helps your nervous system shift state. Fourth, you stop trying to control outcomes you cannot control. This is where the circle concept becomes practical. You cannot control the Fed's next rate decision, but you can control your credit utilization. You cannot control whether your industry is automated next, but you can control your skills narrative and your network activity. You cannot control housing markets, but you can control your debt structure and your willingness to negotiate your rent or relocate when possible. Now you might be thinking, this sounds like self-help, but this is economic reality. In a world where AI reduces the number of middle-class safe tasks and where interest rates and inflation distort affordability, your mental waste is not a side issue. It is the difference between adapting quickly and becoming trapped by fear. And here is why I am pushing this so hard. Because mental waste is contagious. It spreads across your entire decision-making. When you are depleted, you become less skeptical of offers. You trust sales pitches. You rationalize risky choices. You postpone learning because learning requires focus. And focus becomes scarce when your mind is already busy losing internal battles. This is why smart people can still go broke. Not because they are unintelligent, but because they are internally under attack. Now I want to zoom out and connect the dots to 2026's larger system pressures. Because your anxiety is not just private, it is collective. Global debt is over $300 trillion. That means governments and corporations are accumulating obligations. When obligations grow, stress grows. When stress grows, funding shifts. When funding shifts, layoffs happen. When layoffs happen, renters get squeezed. When renters get squeezed, consumer spending shifts. When consumer spending shifts, markets react. And when markets react,